Hello. In this video, we are going to get the Ogre players to start to march back and forth. So, the first thing we could try to just get the ogres to maybe move a little bit, but then eventually we're going to want to get them to bounce and to go back and forth. And some of these features we've already seen with having the player moving left and right, because we're going to want to do turning and starting animations and things like that. So those are some of the pieces that we will add into it. But then we have to define why the ogres are turning around. So with the players, with the arrow keys. Um, so there's a little trick that we can do to make this a little bit easier, and that's actually by just adding some invisible sprites into the game here that are kind of like barriers or kind of like walls that the ogre would bounce off of. So that is what I'm going to start to design in my level here. So I'm going to kind of redesign this a little bit. Um, and what I'm going to do, instead of the ogres being exactly where they are and having two ogres for some reason, I'm going to move the ogre a little bit farther out, and I think I'll extend this level a little more. But I want to have it to where there's this spot here that the ogre is supposed to bounce off of. So I'm going to come up with the letter B for like barrier. I'm going to design this in my level right now. And the idea is that the ogre is going to walk back and forth between those two barriers. And I'm identifying those with the letter B. Now, nothing shows up and this doesn't just magically happen by doing that. So then I have to actually say what B stands for. So I go up here and I'm going to this is going to be a little bit more like wall, so I'm going to copy and paste the wall stuff, but then change it to a letter B. So if I just did it exactly like this, then I would get those things to show up here. Now, what I'm going to do right now is the very last line here that says go to the menu. I'm just going to change this to go game for the purpose of testing, because I'm really trying to test the level 1 right now. All right, so I can see that that's where they're going to be, but I don't really want them to be wall pieces either. I don't want them to get in the player's way. Um, so one thing I'm going to do is delete the solid aspect of it, and I'm going to give them a tag of barrier, and I'm going to see if it will let me not use a sprite, although I'm not sure I'm going to get away with that. Okay, it actually does. So that these things still exist if I, yeah, failed to get area dimension. I didn't think I was going to be able to get away with that. Um, so it at least ran it for a little bit, but I think if I ever tried to do collision or something, um, it's going to have some problems. So I do need something like this. Eventually, I just want it to be invisible anyway. So what I'm going to do is add another component. There is this component called opacity. So I can add an opacity component. It shows up somewhere in here. Yeah. So opacity is the opposite of transparency. So if I add the opacity component and I set it to, let's say, 0.1, then it would give me something like this. It'd be pretty transparent. There would be very little opacity, which is a lot of transparency. So I might just kind of leave it like, I might even tune it up a little bit, like this for now, just so I can kind of see it, but I get the feeling that it's something different. but it should not interfere with my player whatsoever because they're not solid. Yeah, so my player can move right through it, but the idea is that the ogre is gonna bounce off of it. All right, so now that those barriers are in place, and eventually I'm gonna set this to 0, then I'll get the ogre to start marching. All right, so there'll definitely be something inside a game. So I could, right here would be perfectly fine, I think. So I would say it'd be the on update function because this is something that I want to constantly happen with the ogres. So on update or tag enemy. That is the tag that I put on the ogres there, comma, arrow function for what's supposed to happen. Now, as I'm going through and dealing with each of these ogres, I'm going to need a variable because I want to say things like ogre.move and all that. So I'm going to use the variable O, and maybe just to make things a little less tricky, I'm going to use the letter E for enemy because O, it might look like a 0 or whatever. So I got the letter E for enemy. So now I have a variable that I can make move. So if I do something like E dot move right, and let's just E dot move 200 comma 0, positive in the right direction. I can at least get this to happen to where the ogre is gonna move like that. All right, and let's see if we can get the ogre's animation to start up. I could do like an every function here, but it probably would just make more sense to do something in the sprite itself. So I wonder if the play I wonder what on sprite, if I can tell it to just play an animation right away. I think that's what this is for. So I can define, when I say sprite, I can add in some JSON data to say which animation should start. So that's, I think, the cleanest way to do this. So inside, I'm going up to the ogre part. Inside of the sprite, I'll say tag ogre, comma, curly braces to start some JSON. And then I'll use the anim, and if I'm saying JSON, I might as well do this. The anim property will be quotes run. That should just by default start the run animation on the ogres. Yeah, all right, so he's got a little run animation there. All right, so we've got the movement started. So in a future video, we'll have to get the ogre to bounce back and forth.